from the beginning up here. Cool. All right, the topic of my presentation is what thermal resistant materials should be in my department's PPE. Purpose of this report would be for like a chief, a supply officer, purchasing agent, basically anybody who would be in charge of buying, making recommendations of buying gear, something along those lines, so that they know the pros and cons of what they may not be buying. The two fibers that I chose were DuPont's Nomex and PBI. I chose these because these are the two most common that you'll find in structural firefighting gear. They are the two most popular, so they're the two easiest to, they're the two most likely that you will encounter. Both have been around for decades, almost 50 years apiece, so there's plenty of information on them. A little bit of history about Nomex. Nomex was originally developed in the late 1950s as a way to add thermal resistance to nylon. Nylon was real big, World War II and all that. Nomex is it was DuPont's go-to fiber. They wanted to find a way to make that more thermal resistant. So they came up with Nomex. The way Nomex works is through thickening and carbonization. The top photo is thickening, the bottom is carbonization. Basically, all that means is as the Nomex fiber heats up, it gets thicker. It expands, which doesn't allow as much heat to penetrate through, which is nice because you won't get as much heat in, but at the same time, it makes it a little bit bulkier, makes it a little bit stiffer to move, and then you might have issues with heat releasing. PBI is the other fiber. It was developed in 1961 by Dr. C.S. Marvel. It was originally developed as he just wanted to make a fire-resistant material. And he came across an organic material, which is nice about it. PBI first gained its popularity with the failure of the Apollo 1 mission. After the Apollo 1 mission failed, NASA realized that they needed to have a fire protection material in their flight suits. So that's actually how PBI became. Like I said, PBI is an organic fiber, so unlike Nomex, which is synthetic, it won't melt, it'll just burn. And PBI has a fire point, a natural fire point of above 1,000 degrees, so it's not going to naturally burn under most fire conditions. The NFPA code that covers all this is NFPA 1971, the standard for structural firefighting gear. Writing of this code began back in the mid-'60s, so around the same time as PBI and Nomex were coming around. It was the first informal code was 1973, and the first formal adopted code came about in 1975, and it covers everything fire gear wise. The three tests that we're going to look at is the total performance protection test, total heat loss test, and the conductive and compressive heat resistance test. These are the three tests that 1971 says you need to do for the composite. So the outer shell, moisture barrier, and thermal liner, three together. Total performance test that's just a picture, but basically what that does, it measures how much heat comes from the outside to the inside, transfer from outside to inside. NFPA 1971 says that you need to have 35, to be passing, you need 35 calories per centimeter squared or more to be considered passing. And basically the way they do this is they put a heat on the bottom side, just measure heat through. Second test is the total heat loss test. This measures how well heat releases from the suit, how long heat can go out of the suit, so dissipate heat from the body. And they say you need to have NFPA, the minimum standard is 205 watts per meter Kelvin or greater to be considered passing. And the third test is your conductive and compressive heat resistance test, and basically that is just for your shoulders and your knee pads. So if you need to, if you're kneeling down in a building, if you use your shoulder to push something up, how does that compressive factor affect your thermal performance of the gear? And that's the machine that they use to test it. It's all done by an independent third party. DuPont, what the manufacturer says, their big claim to fame was their ThermoMan testing, and they claim that under full fire conditions like this for 30 seconds, you're only going to have a 7% body burn. 93% you'd be okay. And the reason for that 7% is because the hands, feet, and head are not covered when they do the ThermoMan. So if you were to take that out, 93% fine. PBI, on the other hand, they did a similar test. Instead of ThermoMan, they call it Pyroman. And they claim that for a 10-second fire exposure fully involved, there will be no opens or no breaks after 10 seconds. And then they also play onto the whole organic thing where it's not going to drip, it's not going to shrink like Under Armour or anything like that. It'll just burn. Like I said, all these testing, what the manufacturer said is fine, but all this testing has to be done by an independent third party. And the person that does that is NIST, the National Institute of Safety and Technology. And the three companies that really make that up is FEMA, the U.S. Fire Administration, and the Department of Commerce through Homeland Security. These three groups come together, and they're the ones that really make all the reports that make all of your labels. The first test we're going to look at is 6993. This is NIST's TPP test. As you can see, Nomex is a measured 15.4, PBI is a measured 15.5. PBI is a little bit higher, but if you look at these the numbers right here, they're lower than the 35 that is required. That's because these numbers are just for the outer shell and they're not for the composites. That's the difference with these numbers. 72, 79 is another test. It's not an NFPA required test, it's a thermal conductive test. And as you can see for PBI, it has an 84% with about a 0.014% error. And this is for treated gear and untreated gear, so brand new gear and gear has been washed a couple of times. And the same thing for Nomex, it has a 0.72 with a 0.1% error, and with a 0.73 with a 0.004% error. As you guys can see, these numbers are very close. PBI has a little bit higher protection, but if you look at the percentage of error, it'll bring it right back down to where Nomex is. So both of them are very, very close in their thermal conductive values. But if you were to look at the results strictly from an NFPA standpoint, PBI had the higher with 15.5 as opposed to 15.4. So if you're looking strictly PBI or strictly NFPA, PBI is the company that has the better gear, but by a 0.10. I mean, there's not really that big of a difference between that or Nomex. So the final conclusions, basically what it comes down to, it's not so much a matter of PBI or Nomex, it's a matter of cost and preference. Whichever your preference is, Lion, Globe, Morning Pride, Firedex, whatever gear your apartment's used to buying or whatever gear they're comfortable with, or whatever you can get a deal on, really. Because as far as like the two protective properties, Nomex and PBI, they're both the same in values for the most part. Questions, comments, concerns? Thank you guys.
What about length of service?
Length of service? I just looked at these as opposed to like their thermal rating. I didn't really look into more as like life of service or pricing or anything. I just looked at which provided the most like thermal protection.
Well, I mean like overall or multiple exposures.
I didn't look into that. I'm sure there are NIST tests that look into it, but for like my paper, I didn't look into that.
All right.
Any other questions? Thank you.